everybody is tired. You've heard a lot of information, had a lot of exchanges, and our bellies are full. But I hope you will stick around for this session, for this afternoon's plenary with us on food. An issue that's cross-cutting, that's come up over the past 3 days since Tuesday. And yes, this afternoon, we're gonna be discussing that. Welcome to the session on food. It's a real pleasure for me to be here celebrating this milestone anniversary with PLUS. And congratulations to everybody at PLUS. My name is Refiloe Joala. I coordinate the food sovereignty program of the food sovereignty program at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung or Foundation for Southern Africa, and our office is based in Johannesburg. And I will be chairing this session with our 5 panelists today that I'll be introducing shortly. In today's discussion, we will attempt to explore and unpack a reimagining of food as a commons. The notion of food as a commons challenges very deeply entrenched assumption that underpins the dominant corporate food system, in which food is seen as private and as a commodity to profit from. Instead, the notion of food as a commons invites us to reimagine food as a relational good and something to be shared. To speak about food as a commons is to speak about power. And the issue of power has come across throughout the different panels. Who gets access and control over land, seeds, and water? What food is grown and how? And whose knowledge and labor is recognized and valued? Those are some of the questions I'll be posing to our panel, as they will be drawing from their respective experiences and areas of expertise to share practices that we have discussed and witnessed on the continent and beyond, where this vision of food as a commons comes into practice through radical and innovative land reform and land reclaiming processes, community seed banks, food co-ops, and local networks of solidarity. I'm thrilled to be joined by an incredible group of panelists whose work embodies this vision in very different and deeply connected ways. Firstly, I'd like to introduce to my left Professor Mamadou Goita, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Research and Promotion of Alternatives in Development and a member of the International Panel on Sustainable Food Systems, IPES-Food, and founding member of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, AFSA. And then next to me also is Connie Tammy Constance Mbodi from Limpopo. She's the only farmer on this panel. And yes, please give her a round of applause. A real expert in practice. She's an agroecological farmer who depends on nature to farm, an agroecological practitioner and activist. She's a seed saver, and she farms on 5 hectares of land, and she also keeps cattle and grows multiple crops. Next to Connie is Dr. Laksmi Adriana Savitri, who's the who leads the Auditor Committee of FIAN Indonesia, a human rights organization that works for the right to food and nutrition. An Indonesia section of FIAN International. She's a scholar activist. She works with various Indonesian peasant farmer organizations and indigenous groups in West Papua. And next to her is Dr. Marc Wegerif, a senior lecturer and development studies program coordinator at the University of Pretoria. Marc is also a principal investigator on the DSIT NRF Center of Excellence in Food Security, under which he leads the Urban Food System Project that focuses on urban food systems of the subaltern. He combines research on food systems and research on land reform and land governance. The focus of research, of his PhD research, was on the food system that feeds the large and vast growing city of Dar es Salaam. And finally, I would like to introduce our last panelist, Dr. Thomas Patriota, who's currently the head of international affairs at Brazil's Ministry of Agrarian Development and Family Farming. He previously taught at IDS, the Institute for Development Studies in the UK, where he obtained his PhD on regional agrarian movements in Latin America and Africa. Yes, that's our panel. If we can give them a round of applause, please. To guide this afternoon's conversation, I've prepared a few guiding questions that will help us unpack what food as a commons means in theory and practice. Each panelist will have a few minutes to respond to each question, and we'll go through 3 rounds of discussion and then open the floor for engagement and reflections. The first framing question that I would like to pose to you all is, how do you understand food as a commons in your context, and why is it such a powerful counter-narrative to the dominant model of food as a commodity? In what ways do practices such as seed sharing, community cooperatives, and territorial governance embody this alternative vision in concrete and transformative ways? We'll start with you, Prof. Goita.
Thank you very much, Refiloe. I'm so happy to be again in Cape Town for this very fantastic gathering with good friends that I met a couple of times in the past. Talking about food is a very tricky debate, because people have the feeling that when you talk about food, you are talking about this plate that is on your table, ready to be eaten. But food is more than that for me. In my context, food is, we have to analyze it in a multidimensional way. First, food is culture. It's culture, why? Because it's really a cultural trait of any community. That will start with what we are putting on what we will call, I will call it abusively, raw materials, what are composing the different segment of this food that is at the end of the day on the table. But also that will come after eating. It's more than just this time of enjoying this good food, tasting very well, but what is in before and what will come after eating. So food is culture because it embodied on our cultural values. The way we cook it, the way we prepare for the different ingredients, the way that you put them together, the way that some differences exist in the different social structure of, and how we use some of this food at a given time, because some kind of food are eaten in a very specific time, because of this is linked to the trajectory, the cultural trajectory of a given community. So for me, food is more than just this thing that we eat, it's also a cultural trait that we have. But more than that, how are we organized just to produce? How are we organized just to cook this food? Because if you go in different societies, in many countries of Africa that I visited, you will see that the kitchen has a particular dimension and significance for a community. The design, the way it's organized, and who can get in, who cannot get in, is also embodied in the end product that we are eating. So you look at food as a common because it's really intimately linked to our culture. It's intimately linked to our the trajectory of our society and the way that we are looking at the world, and the cosmogony that we are in as a community is very important, to define what food is for me. So food is a common because it's intimately linked to the culture of a human society.
Thank you for that input, Prof, around how even households organize around food. Constance, could you please share some grounded examples around the seed savings work that you do, the seed multiplication work that you do within Rural Women's Assembly?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Connie, as she has already said. I am a seed saver within Rural Women's Assembly. The way we think seed to us is life, because we cannot speak of food sovereignty without speaking of seeds. We have an area, an agroecology hub, whereby we have 2 hectares of land, whereby we save seeds. We grow, we save and multiply. The seeds that we're growing there, we share amongst our ROA members to go and multiply, so that we can have enough seeds. After multiplying those seeds, they bring some to our seed banks, because we have a seed bank whereby we are saving those seeds. And then now that, where I'm from, it's we have a challenge of ongoing drought, where we focused much on the seeds that are adaptable to our climate. And it's working for us as seed savers.
Thanks, Constance. I think in the next round it will also be interesting to hear how you are exchanging seeds across Southern Africa and reversing the disappearance of some indigenous food crops and bringing them back to South Africa, where there are no longer enough food markets. Next, we're going to have Laksmi. If you can speak to your experiences as FIAN Indonesia.
Yes. Thank you, Refiloe. When we understand and practice food as social relations, as Connie does, it connects people with nature and with other people through labor. Food is always within an exchange relation. It means reciprocity with other people, a practice of care, and can broadly understood as a base of social reproduction of life. It becomes a means of accumulation. When food is produced for profit only, then food becomes projects of expropriation and extraction that forms plantation and the manufacturing of ultra-processed food, like the ones we are facing in as the large-scale food estate projects in Indonesia that started to occupy Indonesia's frontiers. Yet, both forms exist together in Indonesia, and it complicates the idea of simple transformation from commodification to commoning of food. Food as a form of care constructed by practice of sharing, collectivity, and mutual interests are not something happened only in the past, in the pre-capitalist or pre-colonial societies, but I see it in Indonesia. It exists together with production of food as commodity. Yet, food as commons is a terrain of everyday struggle, especially for small fishers, small farmers, rural urban working people. Seed sharing, food sharing, reciprocal work embedded in tradition and rituals have navigated its ways in the commodification of subsistence in peasants' and fishers' everyday survival since colonial time. because colonialism introduced the commodification of food. Seed sharing and food gifts, for instance, for small farmers and fisheries in many places in Indonesia exist because it is how farmers reduce their production and consumption costs through social relation of reproduction. It is the intervention of capitalist state with laws that restrict seed exchange, allow seed and food imports like the ones that we are facing today, including states' use of military force to control food production and distribution. Also, states' reluctance to implement agrarian reforms is really constraining factors for food commoning that we are dreaming as a way to counter all these constraints. So in the context of Indonesia, food as commons can be transformative, but it can happen when the political economic opportunity exists to support it, and it is still a very big homework for us to do that.
Thanks, Laksmi. I think when we get to Thomas, he can share some light on how effective policy responses can address those issues. Moving over to you, Marc, can you please just unpack how we can think of food commons within the informal food economy?
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here on this last day in the afternoon, even those at the back on the laptops, you know. And first of all, yes, Joala, sure. First of all, I just want to stress that, you know, in a food system, an agri-food system, we really have to look at this fit across the food system from producers, processors, you know, markets, retailers, and so on. And in the corporate-dominated system, there is a fit, the nature and the scale of the production that fits with the, you know, increasingly concentrated distribution centers and so on. And what we see in that system is rising inequality, increasing concentration of ownership. And the concentration in processing, in retailing, and is more than the concentration in land. And the concentration nowadays with financialization in the investment funds that own so much of the food system is even more concentrated globally, and not even nationally, because all our big food companies have major international shareholdings. And, you know, and this is, of course, a system that is unhealthy, I think, for our soils, for our society. So I firmly believe we need counter movements to that. We cannot talk about any kind of, you know, equitable land reforms without changing those other parts of the food system that farmers have to fit into along the way. So what interests me is the counter movements to that sort of corporate domination. And I have to say up front, I don't think food is a commons. So what does excite me, though, is that, you know, based on research I've been doing over the last years, from Dar es Salaam, Joburg, Cape Town even, and, you know, on the street traders, what is often referred to the informal part of the system, what excites me is that we have parts of the food system that are organized by the subaltern, those in poverty, the oppressed in poor communities. And this is exciting, especially where they are transforming and challenging this corporate and increasingly financialized food system. And they are challenging it through the organization of food production that can even feed our cities. And if we can't do that, we don't have a viable challenge to that corporate system. And we see it across Africa, from Ghana to Tanzania, the small farmers where there wasn't so much land dispossession as we had in South Africa, linked to traders, markets with market traders and so on, that are feeding even the large cities. And even in South Africa, with the corporate concentration that we have in South Africa, I've been surprised to find how much we have these alternative food systems from below in the form of street traders and so on. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the woman who sits on the corner, whether it's in Langa or Ivory Park, Deep Salute Alex, where we've been doing research and so on, selling those vegetables. The young man walking around door to door with a trolley loaded with fresh produce, selling it at affordable prices. And importantly, they are out-competing the supermarkets and the corporate system. Just to give you an idea before I then stop on this first intervention, you know, the municipal market system, which is essential to this part of the food system of street traders in the informal sector, is worth, last year, about 24 billion rands worth of sales went through those municipal markets alone. And remember, these are common spaces. This is a publicly owned space. And the street traders, who now make up 50 to 60% of all the sales through that, so more than 12 billion rand a year just from that, even before we count the other wholesalers, the direct buying from farmers. They also take up common space. They are using, so this system is also dependent on common space much as I think food is not a commons. And to give you an idea how competitive they are, with that billions of rand of business, we did price tracking for 2 years. Over that 2-year period, on average, onions were 7.85 rand a kilo cheaper than in the supermarkets. So the formal sector was 51.9% more expensive in onions per kilo than the street trader. Tomatoes, 9.63 rand per kilo, cheaper if you bought from the street trader. So the formal sector was 53.4% more expensive. That is fundamentally challenging the domination of that corporate food system. And I think in that sense it's resisting that corporate system as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Marc. If you can just jump in, please, Thomas, around the agrarian reform and land reform in Brazil and the policy responses around that.
How many minutes? Just so I make sure I don't go over.
If we could try to keep it to 3 minutes
Okay,
for
I'll try.
now.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity to share. When we talk about food as a commons in Brazil, of course, there was a lot of rights-based, the right to food has been enshrined in our whole legal system, and the whole zero hunger policies instated by President Lula 20 years ago very much relied on a participatory system of local all the way to national food councils, including the National Council on Food and Nutrition Security, which is 2/3 civil society, 1/3 government, and the zero hunger policy enabled to remove Brazil from the hunger map in 2014. We went back into the hunger map, FAO hunger map, in the right-wing and neo-fascist governments that we had between 2016 and 2023, and now in Lula's third mandate, we again just got out of the FAO hunger map a few months ago, removing more than 24 million people out of hunger. But, well, how did we do that? There's a myriad of policies that there's no time to go over, but there's definitely a combination of social policies and economic policies. And these economic policies that are implemented, particularly by our ministry, involve strengthening what we call family farming, small and medium scale farming, including through access to markets that are guaranteed by public purchase schemes, such as the Food Acquisition Program and the National School Feeding Program. And this is connected to the land reform process. Just for a bit of background, South America, just as Southern Africa, has the highest Gini coefficients of land inequality in the world for historical reasons. We had more than 3.5 centuries of slavery, and so still today 1% of landowners own about 50% of the land in Brazil. Yet we have managed to at least redistribute the equivalent about a tenth of our national territory, about 90 million hectares, since the democratization period in the 1980s, and also to recognize, or what we call regularization of land of Afro-descendant rural populations, which are reminiscent from former slaves who managed to run away from the plantations. And this is also part of our land reform process. So how do we connect that to our national food policy? Well, many of these policies are specifically directed at land reform settlers. So when we're talking, for example, about the food acquisition policy, to give example and some numbers, we had in the last 2 years about the equivalent of $50 million purchasing 30,000 tons of food from about 540 cooperatives and associations, including basically about 17,000 families. And these were donated to about 750 food entities, whether these be schools or preschools. And some of the priorities publics in these projects, in the food acquisition for the food acquisition program to vulnerable people or to primary and secondary school students, we have, including in the priority publics, the land reform settlers. So 17% of land reform settlers had access to these guaranteed markets by the state. 80% were women, 23% were traditional peoples and communities, including Afro-descendant rural populations. But these also, the land reform settlers, receive, 80% of them are part of the single registry system that channels these different social policies, including our cash transfer program, Bolsa Familia. About three-quarters of them benefit from that. And therefore, there's a system, there's a combination of policy where we're still, make a big effort to reach all of that population. We still need to, increase our coverage, universalize our coverage. But basically, the idea is to demonstrate. There are some studies that showed already through a pretty big sample of, I can tell the numbers later, of land reform settlements, and that showed that land reform settlements were actually more productive than other farms in the production of several of the key food staples. So this is also part of efforts that I will talk about in the next questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Thomas, for highlighting that. And access to land is obviously critical for food production, and bolstered by guaranteed markets by the states also highlights how the role of the state can be supportive in creating systems of care and ensuring food access for all. And just to go back to your points, Marc, and perhaps challenge your views around food as a commons. And I mean, the story about the prices of onions in the informal economy being lower than what they are in supermarkets shows the central role that the informal food economy plays in ensuring access, enabling people to access food, much of the population actually. But there are also systems of credit and repackaging of food to ensure that it's accessible for vulnerable individuals and households. And I wonder if, in some ways, that may be ways in which the informal food economy is disrupting not only the market, but the idea of food as a commodity and as private. Because if I'm willing to repackage it to make sure that you can actually access it, there's an element of care there. And systems of trust and reciprocity in terms of how these credit systems are arranged is also something that I think would be interesting to unpack. But going back to the role of the state, Mamadou, I think Mali has also a very fascinating and compelling case of not only social movements, but farmers really resisting, for instance, commercial seeds and the entire package of chemical inputs that is being thrown at them from different angles through these agricultural development initiatives. I wonder if you could speak to that and also talk about how the state can be instrumental in reimagining food as a commons in some ways.
Thank you very much. I would like to come back to Marc's, what Marc just said as food not common. I think that there is a big debate that we should have here also before going far. But there is a difference between the means, the market issue being led by these young people selling at lower price is a mean. These are means, but the issue of collectivism and common is to be differentiated about different segments of a food system. So even the production, you take a family farming system or some individual farm that women can have is vegetable growing, contributing to the whole. But the end is that this trait that we have is there is a commonality of how this food that we eat, that we produce first, that we process, that we trade, and that we eat, and then that we recycle at the end of the day, is linked to the cultural, social, and economic background of a given community. So the food as a common has to be linked not to one segment, that is the trading system, but also to the whole process. But it's not new that with individuals from the community selling compared to the supermarket usually are cheaper. But in the sense of we have, for instance, I can give an example of women processing. Sometimes just to access to supermarket, they will just the package. The pack is more expensive than the product that is inside this package. Why? Because they have to give a feeling that this is something that need to be addressed to a given part of a society, those who have resources to go to the supermarket. You go in my country, you will see that many people don't go. I don't go to the supermarket in my country because I already know that the small shops on the street and those who are selling this product at the street, not only they are cheaper, but the quality of the product is higher than what you can find in the supermarket. So the common dimension of it shouldn't be linked just to the trading side, but also to the whole process. Having said that, I can elaborate more on it. In the case of Mali, since 2006, Mali has been, the government has been engaging a process of integrating food sovereignty as the guidelines of our food, for agricultural policies. 2006, this is just after the process in Senegal that we started at the same time, and this is the reason why the forum, on Yeleni Forum, took place in Bamako, in Mali, in Selenge, just magnifying the fact that Mali was one of the 2 first countries in the world to introduce the concept of food sovereignty as a political agenda and guideline for the agricultural policy. And this led us to some reform, because after this process, we engaged in 74 kind of reforms in the whole agricultural policies, and one of them was the land reform. The policy has changed, and we have separating the agricultural land, including agriculture, fishing, pastoralism, so cattle, and also forestry. These 4 segments have been introduced in one key, talking about the food, agricultural land reform that we qualify that agricultural land policy, and that there is an agricultural land law that has been linked to that. And this to say that we cannot talk about food as a common. We are talking about the sovereignty of some of the things. That is land first, and land bringing back the customary law as the key way for accessing to land and security on land has been very instrumental in the rest of the process. Actually, we have what we call the village land commissions, in addition to the communal level municipality land commission, just to make decision on how some of the group can access and then be secure on the land issue. The second reform that we are just undergoing is the seed sovereignty program. Now we have a new policy that is saying 73% of the seed that is used in Mali are from farmer seed system. 73%. This is recognized officially. This is why our new policy on seed talk about seed sovereignty, not only, but is giving space for this farmer seed system to be at the center of the process. So there are some other provisions that I can talk about. So this to say that this issue of food as a common should be intimately linked to the way that we organize our production system, but also the way that we organize the market issue. So sharing seeds and all these are recognized today to be the basis of our seed system in the country. We have 2 components. This is the conventional one and the pharmacy system, but saying that all the hybrid seeds there will be a level of taxation that will allow to reinvest in what we call the pharmacy system. Just to say that this seed sovereignty is intimately linked also to the way that we produce and what we consume. To give you the last an example, you know that the adjustment program of the 80s are completely changed, you know, the eating habit in West Africa particularly. Because after the adjustment program, most of the small-scale industries that were there, all the cooperatives, but also the extension service have been completely dismantled in most of the country. In my country, for instance, we had 12,423 villages. And each village has at least one extension service agent, either for fishing, for cattle, or for vegetable growing, or for forestry. But after the 84 adjustment program, all this extension service has been dismantled. And all the companies that were dealing with processing on the food has been also privatized. But what is the impact of this? Mali have been slowly becoming dependent for the import of some of the products like rice, And Senegal is a typical case that actually we say that Chebujan, this is a rice with fish, is a traditional food in Senegal. It's not. It's a national dish, but it's not a traditional food. You will see that only the 80s that they speak of accessing to rice, because it's opening the door for this, has bring all the Asian countries exporting rice in the country. It has been completely transformed the food system. Now there is no control of the rice import in this country, where you have more than 80% of the rice that is consumed coming from outside. So where is the commonality of this food that we are talking about vis-a-vis the place that is taking actually in the food system? It was just millet and sorghum that were dominating in my country. We are more than 63% of the cereal that is consumed are about millet and sorghum, and that is linked to our culture and is still just embodied in the food system that we have actually.
Thanks, Mamadou, for that, showing us how the adoption of food sovereignty international policy is in some ways resolving the contradictions between national agricultural development goals and the lived realities of small-scale farmers on the ground. Constance, I just wanted to ask you, in terms of your fields and those of the other members within the Rural Assemblies network, how has the seed exchange contributed to greater diversity? Are you growing foods now that you weren't growing previously? Could you please just speak to that point?
Yeah, saving seeds has brought big differences, because through exchange of seeds, we managed to have the seeds that we were no longer having, and then it has brought sovereignty to our seeds, because for us to be healthy, we need to eat a diverse diet of food, and the food which comes from the seeds. So it has made a big difference. We share these seeds through seed festivals, through farmer-to-farmer support visit, whereby we visit other farmers. We bring our seeds and then we share with them, and they share their seeds with us. And then we also managed to recover the seeds which were lost in our areas through coming together with the sisters from the SADC region. When they bring their seeds, we bring our seeds, and then we exchange those seeds. And then as we are in 6 provinces, each and every province we have a seed bank in an agroecology hub, whereby we are saving those seeds. Even in our places where we're staying, we're promoting family seed banks, whereby we are saving those small seeds, and then when we come together, we share. So that leads us to seed sovereignty. We have a variety of seeds. Yes.
Thanks for that. I mean, when we think about the violence of colonialism and apartheid in South Africa, it's really been the separation of the people from land and nature, and the disappearance of a lot of the indigenous food that is grown and consumed in other Southern Africa that doesn't exist in South African food system is really a tragedy. And I think the work that the Rural Women's Assembly is doing is helping to reverse that in some ways, and hopefully bring in the youth as well to restore the indigenous knowledge around food production and food diversity. We don't have a lot of time left, and for our 3 remaining panelists, I wanted to ask you to please just sort of touch on the issue of what it would take to reinstate the commons, particularly in terms of rethinking relationships to land, water, and seeds, and what this means in practice for communities seeking to reclaim their rights to produce, share, and distribute food. Along with that, please also share your key messages, and then we'll open up the floor for further engagement. Thanks.
Before replying to that question, I would like to address a bit about the food sovereignty, because it is stated in our food law in Indonesia, and it was not given by the state. It was a result of struggle and celebrated as the winning moment of agrarian movements. But, and this is an autocratic critique, its definition of sovereignty is different from how we understand it as the right of peoples to democratically control or determine the shape of their food system. It is defined as the sovereignty of the state to decide its food production, consumption, and distribution without foreign country intervention, aimed to the fulfillment of the right to food. So in such case, this food nationalism aligns itself with food security that allows food imports as means of food provision. And because Indonesia is a member of WTO and signed the agreement of agriculture that binding states to free food commodities from protection, global value chain is not seen as a contradictory factor to the state's sovereignty, especially after the issuance of other law that opens food imports at any time. So there are many contradictions in terms of how food sovereignty is used. And this food nationalism under our recent president has justified the military intervention to control the national food system by putting military personnel in the state-owned agri-food enterprises and food governance institutions. So in our context, food sovereignty is utilized to gain states' accumulation, populism, and legitimize authoritarianism. But while on the other hand, many peasants and small fishers, unions and organizations, indigenous people communities have practiced the genuine food sovereignty as a counter movement since many years. So in such dynamic for Indonesian context, not only land, but the food sovereignty itself needs to be reclaimed from the authoritarian populism cooptation. So it is an already concept to be practiced to resolve contradictions between state goals of agri-food accumulations and working people struggle against it. And also food as commons, broadly understood, can be an irony for Indonesia's experience because it can become a top-down intervention program. As a realization of his political campaign, our president has claimed to have delivered free, nutritious school meals for 20 million school children within a year of his presidency. But only in a few months, 8,000 children have fallen sick from eating the rotten and poisonous meals. The nutrition fulfillment service units that supposedly provide the free nutritious meals is dominated by Prabowo, our president, loyalists, including the nationwide Policies Wives Associations, and due to the very small budget allocation per meal, the cheap ultra-processed food is intensively used in the distributed meals. The unhygienic and not properly sanitized food processing is bypassed because of cronyism. So it is not only a negation of nutritious meal claim, but also indicates a corporatization of this program, where local produce and local farmers are excluded. And from the lenses of human rights defenders, FIAN Indonesia and many others human rights defenders organization in Indonesia has filed a complaint to the National Commission of Human Rights that the Indonesian government has violated right to food of many its citizens, especially children, including civil rights violations done by state apparatus in food estate projects across the archipelago. So when food as a commons comes from below, for many organized peasant farmers, organizations, fishers, and rural urban working people, and indigenous communities, people's control of land, water, sea, oceans, and coastal areas is a daily struggle, a making life practice, and it needs to be placed within a dynamic where owning plots of living means gaining dignity as individual as well as community.
We'll eat a bit into our next session, so you can have enough time to express your concluding remarks. Please go ahead, Marc.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just to come back, I'm saying for me, food is not a commons, because I think from the perspective of the farmer who's worked to grow that food they've grown, they need to get a return for their labor, for what they've put into this. For the perspective of the street trader who buys the food in a market or from a farmer and then needs to sell it to create a livelihood for themselves, to feed their children and send them to school, this is not a commons. They need to get a return on it. But I do think it's fundamentally different from the corporate system. I don't think they are commodifying it. They are not commodifying food as something we invest in for returns on its appreciation in value. Just as the small farmer and the peasant farmer is not seeing the land as that commodity to speculate in, but they do want to get the use value of that land, and they do need to support their own livelihoods. But they're doing it fundamentally differently, and social relations are as important to their operation as is capital. They start with very little capital. The people, a few hundred rand, a couple of dollars to start and build up. And they have, of course, I'm talking about people like the informal sector, street traders, like farmers. They have their own enterprise. They control and want to say, this is my business, this is my farm. But it doesn't mean they're not collaborating. They are collaborating a lot. They're working in interdependent and reciprocal relations with others. They have, I think, a very different kind of relationship with the customer than the supermarket or the corporate does. They know those customers. They live in that community. They know they're suffering. It's a very different type of relation, and it is rooted in culture and a different kind of way of looking at food as well. But so in that way, I think they have a very different social relations of production from the corporate system. They offer something different and a different fit in scale and style and culture and food across that food system that makes it work. Of course, I focused on prices because I think for so many of us, the price is important. We're in a country with about 28% of children stunted because of undernutrition. I'm interested in the food systems that can provide food and make it accessible for the majority. That's essential, and if it doesn't work for that, then whatever else, I think, goes out the window. So the prices are important. But as you say, they're making it accessible in so many other ways. The small quantities, the trader who, in the South African context, will sell you that tomatoes for 5 rand, 25 US cents, or the plate of onions, because that's what someone has at that time. And they're doing that still at that very low per kilo price, as I was saying. I think also knowing their communities, knowing the people, they're protecting them. And an illustration of that from our price tracking over 2 years. When we looked at the inflation with the street traders compared to the formal sector, what we saw is that year 1 to year 2, the formal sector prices across 10 items we tracked went up 7.4%. Across the street traders on the same items, they went up 4.1%. Now that's a significant difference and important for people buying that. And it's to do with them knowing their customers. But I also don't want to romanticize it. They know what the customer can afford. So it's not just out of the goodness of their hearts, but it's also because they know they want to keep those customers. But that's, I think, the reality of it. So moving forward, I think they do represent, I think this is working people reimagining the food system from the ground up in difficult conditions. It's not perfect, but they are reimagining it. They are a counterpoint to the corporate system. I think we need to be building new political alliances along the lines of some of these economic alliances of working people, from the small farmers, traders, and so on. And we need to make those economic alliances maybe more political alliances. And certainly I think I'm not saying let the state off the hook. The state has to be held responsible. We need to see a state, and I think in the ICARD calls, we should be saying, recognize and value what working people are doing from the ground up. Value it and support it through the infrastructure that's needed, the provision of security that's needed, the enabling regulations where we don't criminalize someone using the street, but we appreciate that as a common space that they can use to make food available and create livelihoods. Recognize and support value and invest in the public markets. We're neglecting our municipal market system in this country. This is a public common space where people can trade. Recognize those, make sure they are used, they are accessible for the small trader and producer, not dominated by the big corporations. Recognize the space in the street and allow that space in the street. And I think that can help bring transformation in our food system. Thank you.
Just to ask, is this our last intervention before questions, or do we have another round? Because I see there's questions 2, 3, and 4, just so I
yes,
combine
if you could
them.
please just summarize your responses to those questions now.
Sure. I think regarding how food sovereignty can contribute to resolve the contradictions between national agricultural development goals and lived realities of small-scale producers, I think the interventions before me on food sovereignty I think we have the same vision that, of course, food sovereignty means many things, but at the very core, the control of our national food systems, right? Including in our trade policy. And here I'd like to give a concrete example that actually I had the pleasure of presenting a few weeks ago in Cape Town on the margins of a G20 negotiation at the invitation of the Institute for Economic Justice. And here it was quite important and interesting to see how my colleagues, mid-level bureaucrats in the South African Ministry of Agriculture, had the courage and the good idea of ordering several reports, including one in the food systems task force, food security task force, on the role of financialization in food systems, but also the potential positive roles of buffer stocks. And here, just to give a concrete examples on food sovereignty, how can it address these overlapping crises that you mentioned, climate instability, food insecurity, debt conflict, and widening inequality. We've been rebuilding the capacities of our national food supply company, CONAB, which is linked to our ministry. And indeed, not only does it purchase food from family farmers, at least 30% for the National School Food Feeding Program, it also has a very important role in stabilizing prices. So, for example, we had 2 years ago overproduction of maize in one region of Brazil, so that drove the prices down. And so CONAB purchased it at a minimum price that is based on the cost of production to help those farmers be able to support their livelihoods. 6 months later, a drought in the northeast of the region made the maize very expensive, and the small livestock rearers needed maize as a key input for animal feed. What did CONAB do? It sold that maize that it had purchased before at a low price. It sold it still at a lower price than the price that it was being sold in the northeast, but still at a higher price than what it had bought in the center-west region. So in a way, you can benefit the small-scale farmers also who needed that as an input, and also CONAB can self-fund its activities. So this is a concrete example of why buffer stocks are so important to regulate a very unstable environment of international food price volatility. Regarding reinstating food as a commons and relationships to land, water, and seeds, just wanted to give 2 concrete examples of what we're aiming to do, not yet at scale, but slowly but surely increasing that scale of operation in land reform settlements. One of them is our flagship program for COP30, which is called Productive Forests. Basically working, a good part of our land reform settlements are in the Amazon region. They represent about 8% of the territories of the Amazon for historical reasons. And basically it's the idea that you can, you're not going to be able to conserve forests only through command and control, a territory which is almost the size of India, and populated by 30 million people. But what you can do is making the standing trees worth more standing than cut down by strengthening the production, distribution chains and processing chains of fruits, nuts, rubber, and other products of the standing trees. Acai and cacao are just 2 examples of prices that have been good for farmers, with agroforestry systems whereby you combine short cycle crops that help the food security and also the income in the short term, with intercropping them with forestry. That helps not only for the income, for food security, so economic and social sustainability, but also for environmental sustainability, whether it's adaptation, mitigation, biodiversity, water, and soil. And finally, for question 4 on institution governance innovations that are needed to scale up commons-based approaches without undermining their local participatory nature. Just to give some examples of what we're trying to learn also from other parts of the world. I just came back from Andhra Pradesh state in India, where they have the largest agroecological experience in the world, 1.2 million farmers, basically farming without chemicals or in the transition towards that. And they've managed that working a lot with women's self-help groups and this system of farmer-to-farmer extensionism with popular education, and also teaching how to make their own bioinputs. They work in a gradual way whereby they keep a part of the field in chemical farming and a part in agroecological or natural farming, as they call it. And after 1 or 2 years, in many cases, they've shown that yields are actually higher when you are able to apply these agroecological practices than with chemical farming. You also reduce the costs because you don't need to purchase chemical inputs, so you gain twice, so to speak. We know that in the Indian case there have been a lot of cooptation, by political right-wing groups, but let's say that let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, and use some of the positive, at least agronomical and social experiences. And indeed, this is being scaled in other parts of the world. We have agroecological practices in other parts of the world, but the challenge is how to scale them, and we need these popular education initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I think we're doing really well for time, and we can open up the floor. We've heard a few compelling examples on practices around food sovereignty and reimagining how food systems could operate at the local level, but also from a policy perspective, and effective policy responses that are helping to improve food access for the working class. So I'd like to open up at this point and take questions. Can we just go from the front, starting with Patrick, and take hands in the back rows? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Msole from Zambia. Work for Zambia Land Alliance. My question, first of all, I must say that I'm impressed to hear that in countries like Mali, we have policies or laws that support food sovereignty, because that's not the case with my country, Zambia. We have a Seed Act of 2022 that was sponsored by multinational seed companies that require that if you're going to deal in seed, one, your seed might need to be registered as a seed dealer or seed producer. Your seed must be tested. That seed production must be tested. And then the seed must be certified. And so this law is in place. Enforcement or implementation is still underway, but it's a challenge, because what that means is that you can't just produce seed and start distributing it. That becomes illegal. We have a very delicious bean seed called Solwezi beans. We have a Zambian colleague here who knows Solwezi beans. It's very tasty, very nice, but it is officially illegal to distribute it because it is produced on the farms, and you can share it as food, but not as seed. So I'm wondering, Constance, don't you have laws in South Africa that limit who is involved in seed production and who can share seed without being certified and being registered or licensed? Thank you.
Thank you for those reflections. I wanted to respond to Marc and maybe ask a question. The picture you paint of the numbers, at the macro level, the stats, I think, kind of obscure the reality, because, I mean, I have a mother who lives in a village and is basically a subsistence farmer, and what she does is sell the excess of what she makes. I mean, she grows, but I think there's an economy around that also of these lives are subsidized. The prices are low because they're subsidized by me or other people in the cities who are sending money back home, because they basically cannot live off of that, of what they grow anymore. And even in terms of what they grow is limited. There's climate change, the crop is drying, it's not growing sometimes. So I think that there is an economy that is not quite about numbers. There's an intangible quality to this food as commons. And I don't know, I might be misrepresenting it here, but there's an intangible benefit too, because I will tell my mother, well, why are you growing the food? Because you're not, it's costing you more to grow this food than what you make out of it. But it's also about the dignity, the community of sharing. There's a lot of sharing of food that is involved. And of course, she wants to make some money out of it, and she does, but I think that is not the full story. So I think it's not really about numbers so much as what growing your own food, working with the soil means to people as well.
Yeah, very quick question. Actually, what was shared just now reminded me of where I work and where I was born, these two different places. Yeah, for many people, like making life by living on the land is no more possible from agriculture. So it sometimes feels that those who are still living on the land and choosing to, farm, very often these households have some other source of income. So it almost becomes like this choice of growing the crops it's almost like seems like a kind of a village luxury that you can afford to eat those millets, that traditional food. And I mean, luxury is not the right word. I'm actually ashamed to use that there. But like this choice to continue what you used to have is not available to other households. So how to picturize food sovereignty within such context?
Thank you. Just to add on to what Constance was saying, there is a feminist economy to seeds and food systems. In the Rural Women's Assembly, we documented the seed, the history of seed in the different member countries. And there's definitely feminist stories. Many of the women shared that the seeds that they're using, they received as dowries or as wedding gifts from their mothers, who received some of those same seeds or the type of seeds from their mothers. So seeds are transferred intergenerationally. And in times of conflict, women would hide seeds in their hair, in their headscarves, as their most valuable asset to replant, because they're responsible for the household food security first, and then for selling on the market. Also, when the hurricane, the cyclones ravaged through Mozambique and Malawi, sisters from Zambia and Zimbabwe took bags of seeds as solidarity to those system, RUA members in those countries, so that they can start rebuilding. So there's a different economy that's outside of the formalist capitalist system that keep communities going.
I see one more hand. If we can just take a collection of these questions, and before handing over back to the panelists. Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks. Just to the last speaker, sorry, I forgot your name. Could you elaborate more on some of the challenges Brazil faced when trying to implement their state procurement of food? And then, Marc, if you can just speak more to some of the solutions to how we tackle concentration, either state-driven attempts to regulate or more sort of grassroots political mobilization against it. Thanks.
Thanks. While you still have the mic, can you please let us know who you are for when they respond? Thanks.
Sorry, yeah, Malik Dasu from the African Climate Foundation.
Okay, I'm going to hand over back to the panel. And thanks also, Carmen, for sharing those experiences from Rural Women's Assembly. On the issue, before I hand over to Constance, around the legislation in South Africa, which was recently also enacted in 2019, the new Plant Breeders Act and the new Plant Variety Act actually makes provision for smallholder farmers to exchange seeds, even across borders. However, it's very vague on who's the small farmer and the scale at which they can exchange. But there isn't, at the moment, really enforcement that criminalizes the exchange of seed among farmers, although we know that's the direction in which policy is leaning towards, as we've seen across the continent through OIP and other regional bodies, the seed laws reforms that basically don't recognize farmer-managed seed systems and don't even recognize indigenous seeds as seeds. They consider it as grain. So we're seeing that move in terms of policy direction, but also with regards to seed marketing, where plant breeders, which are essentially seed companies, and university institutions are given greater scope in terms of protection around their varieties and the multiplication of those seeds. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add on that, Constance, before we hand over to the other panelists. Mamadou, on the seed question. Okay.
No, I think you've.
Okay. I'll hand over then to Marc and Thomas to respond to some of the other questions that were raised.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm reminded, I was at a PLAS conference, I think it was 2008, and I presented this nice presentation of people who'd occupied land in Limpopo and producing and intercropping and, you know, feeding themselves and gathering from the land, you know. And at the back of the room, Henry Bernstein was sitting there, and he was like, yeah, that's nice, but it's not going to feed the cities, you know. And I kind of took that to heart, you know, and it's real. I mean, absolutely, I love what your grandmother or mother is doing and others are doing, and yes, there is that intangible value, and we see it in urban agriculture and in rural agriculture, and I think there should be space for that, and that's great. And at the same time, you know, whatever small producer in any rural area should be able to make a bit of money to get a return for their labor on their land, their preservation of their seeds and so on. And we do need to have a food system that can supply our cities and feed people. If we don't have it, then we don't have an alternative to the corporate system, where we can criticize that corporate system all we want, but if we don't have another way of feeding cities. So I'm just interested where from the ground up, people are delivering at scale and they are making it work. And street traders are also generally giving a better return to small farmers, you know, paying cash and better prices, you know, per unit than the supermarkets are paying. So it's benefiting those farmers as well. I also think the multitude of sort of different working people involved, from market traders, street traders, and others, the small spaza shops, creates a resilience in the system. It creates more opportunity for small farmers to link, and we're seeing more of that linking happening. It creates the opportunity, whatever the laws are, that, you know, people can use different kinds of seeds and sell them. In some of these street traders, we find, you know, indigenous crops and so on that are being sold there that you don't find in the supermarket. So it's creating more of those different opportunities across this system. I think the other question, the specific question from Malik to me was, you know, the other things the state can do. And much as I'm sort of saying, yeah, value what people are doing from the ground up, it has to be combined with calling, holding the state accountable and saying they need to change some of the structural issues. I think there's a range of ways of doing that. I mentioned already, and I think this can be in the ICARD things as well, we need more investment in public markets. We can also regulate those public market spaces so they're more accessible to a wider range of traders. Like, you only allow a certain amount of trading space, and you reserve space for fresh produce, so you also have healthier foods in them, and you don't have that corporate domination. That's a clear counter to the concentration. I think that, you know, there's a whole lot of things we could discuss. The procurement and the way procurement could be used, the 9 billion rand we spend on our national food program in the schools in South Africa could be used to support wider food system transformation, including buying from smaller farmers, buying more agroecological foods and so on. I think the grain reserves and the buffer stocks are really important, and we need to push those and advocate, for those as well. So let us value what people are doing on the ground, from the ground up, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but saying how do you then build on that, enable that, but also mobilize, and so we need both the ground up and we need a stronger political force pushing for change, and that's where I think we can have these new alliances, rural and urban, across market traders and small farmers and so on, and I think we need to strengthen those alliances, and they need to also be demanding more action from the state to support a different kind of food system. Stop incentivizing the corporates and rather incentivize the smaller scale producers, traders, and so on, in agroecological food.
So I'll respond to Malik on the challenges of food, public procurement. There are many, many challenges. I'll try to go over them. So our national school feeding program, by law since 2009, must purchase at least 30% of the food that is served in primary and secondary schools across the country, almost about 50 million students. So it's a great guaranteed market. But in many cases, the production is not sufficient to meet that. So even if there's a guaranteed market, you need other supports to production. You know, in some municipalities, it's 100% even, because it's at least 30%. But in others, it's a much lower level. So that brings us to the other policies that support family farmers. And by the way, just a parenthesis, when we say family farmers in Brazil, I said small and medium-scale producers. In a South American context, medium can go up to 400 hectares, which can sound huge, obviously, but the predominance of family labor is the key criterion that allows you to differentiate that from farms that are, you know, large scale and exported and so on. So land size is not necessarily a proxy for capitalization. So you can have, of course, a lot of family farms in Brazil are very small in size as well, less than 10 hectares or even 1 or 2 hectares, for example, in the semi-arid Northeast. So this diverse universe of family farmers, in the land reform settlements, for example, only 50% of these 1 million families are registered in our National Family Farmer Registry. And the registry is essential to be able to reach the farmers and combine also the different policies that will allow them to produce these foodstuffs that are being purchased by public procurement. For example, technical assistance and rural extension, we're not even reaching 20% of our family farmers with that. And that is such a fundamental aspect of policy, because the extensionists help not only in the agronomic part, but also in the sort of organization of the economic plan of planting and harvesting and processing and distributing and so on. We do have one specific program to address that, again, in land reform settlements, and that also relates to the nutrition side of things. You know, our large-scale farmers in Brazil basically produce 15 commodities. Our family farmers produce about 1,000 different types of crops, so it's much more diverse, potentially much more nutritious. But they're still very much addicted, to many of them, to planting soya, maize, and producing beef, because that's what, you know, has guaranteed their income in many cases. So we've been aiming to bring about technical assistance and rural extension through a program of training that involves universities and train-the-trainer programs with youth from land reform settlements, but also in our credit policies, which the state guarantees very low interest rates, 0.5%, 1%, 3-year grace period, 10-year repayment, for particular foods that are parts of the staples, you know, fruits, vegetables, milk, and so on, fish. And these also allow for this transition, and we've seen this in the last few years, a relative reduction in the use of commodity crops by family farmers, and a relative rise in the production of these foods that are purchased by the National School Feeding Program, and also a small rise in the agroecological part, but there's still a huge way to go in that dimension. Just one last point that relates also to what was being talked about in terms of how will we feed the cities. We have in Brazil what we call food deserts and food swamps. Basically, the urban peripheries is where we see a lot of the not only undernutrition but malnutrition. We had the rise of a so-called new middle class, which only applied in terms of income brackets, because definitely didn't apply in terms of access to quality health and education on a type of global North social democracy system. But even that new middle class in terms of income, it was basically starting to eat worse food than when they were poorer, because they started going to the supermarkets and so on. What are we trying to do to address that? Well, one of the ways is using the state's capacity to purchase food, the same food acquisition program capacity. This is still in the works as a bill, but we have the expectation of approve it soon. Basically, the state will purchase food from the family farmers and then will sell it at a price that is accessible to the local retailers in the urban peripheries, and thereby allowing for a more diverse array of nutritious foods to be available in the peripheries. Why? Because the retailers in the urban peripheries were basically purchasing from the large-scale distributors, and of course, because of the large distance they need to undergo to buy these foods from the large supermarkets, they would buy the cheapest foods, which are usually the least nutritious ones. So by bypassing this circuit with the state's capacity to purchase and distribute food, you can allow also the small retailers to move the economy in their urban peripheries with a wide array, diverse, nutritious food. Thanks.
Chair, can I just add to my answer to
Yes,
say
please.
we also need radical land reform. And when we're talking food, we got to remember we need radical land reform, but we need to combine that with radical reform and change in the markets as well, in the rest of the food system as well, to enable those people who get land to also benefit from it and create decent lives for themselves, which I think people want.
Thanks, Marc. Yes, Constance extends her apologies. She has to rush to the airport, and I think many of us will have to do the same. Thank you so much, Constance, and thank you to all our panelists this afternoon for these powerful and deeply grounded reflections, and to everyone for engaging so thoughtfully. I'm afraid we've run out of time. It's almost 3:30, Mamadou. Would you want to make some final remarks quickly before I close?
I don't want to speak, but I don't want to close that because I have a feeling that there are many misunderstandings on what Marc is saying. Because I have a feeling that Marc is thinking that when you talk about commons, it's just that we don't need to make money out of agriculture. That we don't need to make money. We cannot talk about food system in a sustainable way. We were talking about market, but which market are we talking about? Who is benefiting from this market? Because if you look at the international market, there are only 3 products that is dominating, and none of them are really embodied in African culture in terms of food system. Wheat, rice, and maize. These are the 3 that exist on the international market. Then, most of the seed issue is related to that. Why people are trying to homogenize everything, to transform everybody to maize eaters or rice eaters, was the case of Senegal that I've been mentioning, because we don't have our tubercle on this international market. We don't have our millet and sorghum on this international market. But we are not saying that people don't have to make money out of it, but the territorial market, that is the linkages between food production and the consumption system and the recycling system, is more adapted in that case because it allows to sustain the system, not only creating wealth, creating jobs, but also creating conditions to maintain the food system that exists in a given community. I don't want to close this. We were talking about that. We don't mean that if food as a common, that people don't have to make money. People have to create wealth. This is the condition of maintaining it. And then when you talk about market, which market are you talking about? Because every single farmer, family farming that I know in the case of West Africa, everybody will go to the market, even if they are producing not sufficiently to feed the family, but they will go at the market with part of this production to get resources for other kind of product over to our fish or meat or to go to pay the schooling of kids and so on and so forth. This is creating wealth around that, even though it's not sufficient. So the market that we are talking about is really relevant in terms of trading between. So supermarket vis-a-vis these young people trading or the short at the corner, that is also creating a lot of wealth, for the sustainability of the system itself. So it's not a void, it's not forbidden, but it's had to be controlled by those who are really producing and those who are really feeding people, but also those who are interested in the food system. If not that, it will extravertial our economic system, for sure.
Thanks, Mamadou, for your concluding remarks, and I guess you and Marc can continue the dialogue offline. Yes, it's 3:30, and we've reached the end of our discussion this afternoon, and I think we're all in agreement that our food systems need to be transformed, and today we've also heard reflections about how that is already happening in small pockets in different parts of the world. And I think on the issue of reimagining food as a commons, what has really come out is also the need to reclaim our relationship with the land, but also how we think about labor and control of the resources that are needed in order to grow nutritious and accessible food for all. If you would like to engage further, I encourage you to get in touch and engage with our panelists beyond this discussion. I'm not sure who I'm handing over to. Is it you, Ben, or Ruth? Are we going to tea break? Okay. All right. Thanks.